How can we engage in truthful ways with the reality that surrounds us?
I would have asked the same question thousands of years ago. Without going back that far, take one of the first great works on classics on what was now called political science, political philosophy at the time. David Hume's book of the first principles of government, mid 18th century. His opening paragraph is worth reading and thinking about. He says, he opens the book by saying, that he himself, he says, I'm amazed by the easiness with which the powerful control the general population. This is a mystery because power is in the hands of the governed, not the governors.
Wow.
So how do they achieve this how do they manage this enormous achievement? He said it must be by imposing consent, and what we now call manufacture of consent, must be by imposing consent. And if the implication is that if people could withdraw their consent, they wouldn't have to be subject to masters. He says this is true of the most free societies as of the most harsh and militaristic. And there's a lot to that. And what he's talking about is what Gramsci in his prison cells called hegemonic common sense, and the way it's imposed. You just think of it as being like the air you breathe. How could you question it? If you look through history, the process of imposing consent is very striking and interesting one, and it holds today as well. So if you're studying political science.
Yeah.
Suppose that somebody asks the question, suppose somebody brings up to you what Adam Smith wrote about the way the political system works. Try it and see what happens. According to Adam Smith, the people he called the masters of mankind, the merchants and manufacturers of England, are the principal architects of government policy, and they manipulate it to ensure that their own interests are very well attended to, however grievous the effect on the people of England and those subject to the savage injustice of the British abroad. He was speaking of India. Try that in an essay about the United States. It applies almost perfectly, but without knowing what you're studying, I'm reasonably confident that you're not being told that that's how the United States works. This was 1776, the year of the outbreak of the American Revolution. And true to form, when the Constitution was formed in the 1780s, it abided by Adam Smith's precepts. The Constitution was written by a small group of wealthy men, mostly slave owners, and their main concern was to prevent democracy. In fact, the major scholarly study on the Constitution, gold standard in the field, Michael Klarman, is called The Framers' Coup Against Democracy. For Madison, the major framer, the goal was to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. That's the American Constitution. Population didn't like it. There have been struggles ever since, but that remains pretty much the case. We've just been through 40 years of so-called neoliberalism, which is presented as libertarian, but in fact is an effort to ensure that totalitarian institutions, which is what corporations are the principal architects of policy and make sure that their own interests are attended to, however grievous the effect on others. That's the history of the last 40 years, quoting Adam Smith.
Wow.
If this is not what people are taught in their political science courses.
Yeah.
We are taught to consent to ideas like American exceptionalism. The government tries to help people. It's a free democratic society. Everybody has a chance. And quite different from the reality that Adam Smith was able to perceive. And that's the framers of the Constitution were able to perceive when they carried out a coup against democracy. Well, one example in your field, but take anyone you like. Take a neighboring field. You're probably taking courses in international relations.
Yeah.
Study international relations. The main dominant concept is what's called the realist approach. That is, states pursue their national interest. Now, take a look at the phrase national interest. That suggests that it has something to do with interests of the nation. Take a look at actual practice. Has almost nothing to do with the interests of the nation. Has to do with the interests of the masters of mankind who control policy, often very harmful to the nation. So the very first word you learn is already imposing doctrine which is radically at odds with the truth. And it goes on from there. Well, that's the way, going back to David Hume, the way you get to the easiness with which the many are controlled by the few. It's all over, everywhere. And you have to decide, am I going to conform to it and repeat it, get a good job, be well treated, or am I going to raise some questions about it? Like kinds of questions I've just been raising. If you do, it might be difficult. If you write an essay on this, chances are you're not going to get an A.